Hey there, and welcome to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering the real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees, and this is my amazing co host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. Dr. Ryman, you want to tell them why we're here?
So we're here because finding reliable and scientifically based information about plant medicines on the internet can be tough. Either you're getting conflicting information that just doesn't jive with what you've experienced, and you don't even know if you can trust the people giving it to you. So that's where we come in. We're here to give you actionable, bite-sized episodes where we go over some of the most pressing issues regarding the safe and balanced use of plant medicine. So you can think of us just like your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters.
That's us. Well, greetings, highway philosophers and road trip ponderers. Today, we are revving up the engines of curiosity and hitting the open road of a burning question. Is it safe to take the wheel after a rendezvous with Mary Jane? Buckle up because we're navigating the twists, turns, and potential roundabouts of driving post marijuana. It's a journey where caution meets curiosity, and we're your GPS through the high roads of this cannabis conundrum. So, Dr. Ryman, is it safe to drive after using marijuana?
Well, so it's really interesting because we all have this commonly held belief, which is accurate, that drinking and driving is dangerous, right? We know that alcohol affects things like perception, reaction time, decision making, but not just alcohol. We know that these things can also be impacted by lack of sleep or being distracted or even some prescription or over the counter drugs. So now we have cannabis legal in a lot of places, and people want to make good decisions about driving and using marijuana. So let's take a look at what the research says on the use of cannabis and then hitting the open road. So
All right.
one
So,
really
what does the
important
research say?
what does the research say? Well, it's really interesting because again, we focus a lot on drinking and driving, but cannabis and driving is different in a lot of ways. One way it's different is that experience counts. So, unlike alcohol, even if you're a very experienced alcohol user, if you have enough alcohol on board, it's going to impact your perception, your reaction time, all the things we talked about, which is why we've established a national limit of 0.08 blood alcohol content in order to determine whether someone is inebriated. But cannabis kind of turns that whole thing on its head because what the research says, and there was a study that actually just came out about this again last week, looking at medical cannabis patients, is that people that use cannabis regularly, like medical patients, so people that are using every day, multiple times a day, actually do not exhibit any issues with driving. So their reaction time is the same as sober drivers. Their perceptions are the same as sober drivers. They basically act like sober drivers. And now part of this reason is because people that use cannabis very regularly aren't necessarily getting intoxicated by it. And if they do feel intoxicated, it isn't to the point where it starts to affect their motor skills. They're very aware of how cannabis makes them feel. They are very able to manage the world around them, even after consuming cannabis. The people that have the most problems with driving after consuming cannabis are your occasional drivers or occasional consumers. So if you're somebody that uses cannabis maybe once a week, maybe once a month for special occasions, you are the one who has time management issues, perception issues, driving issues after consuming. So people that are regular consumers of cannabis tend to not be impaired while driving. People that are occasional users of cannabis have a much higher risk of being impaired while driving. Now, another interesting difference between cannabis and alcohol is that one of the main issues with alcohol and driving is speeding. So people are driving too fast, they're blowing through stop signs. Cannabis drivers, even though this is also not safe, have the opposite problem. They're driving too slow, they're sitting at stop signs for like a long time. They are sitting at red lights even after the light turns green. They are sitting waiting to make a right turn onto a street for a really long time. So it does affect driving, but maybe in a slightly different way than alcohol affects driving.
Wow. I'm so glad that we're talking about this, and my light's not going to work right now. So we're just going to go with it. Because there's the more states that legalize cannabis, right, there are more users that are using it. And then we've got consumption lounges opening up. So that's a whole can of worms that we're not going to open up right now. But I think what's important is, the experience, like you said, the people who are experienced versus the non-experienced. So I know we've got breathalyzers for alcohol. Is there something similar for cannabis?
Well, this is where it gets difficult again. Cannabis just always likes to be so unique and difficult. So there's a couple reasons why breathalyzers for cannabis are hard to validate. One is that one of the types of breathalyzers they tried to develop detects residue in the mouth. So it's looking to see like how long ago did you inhale smoke into your mouth? And we can tell by swabbing your cheek that you inhaled something 15 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago. But the problem with that is it doesn't account for other methods of consumption. So if you have eaten an edible or you've taken a tincture, maybe even a vape pen, it's not going to detect that. So it's really only going to detect people who have smoked. So that's one of the issues with the breathalyzers. Another issue, or with blood tests to detect whether there's THC in the system, is that THC stays in the system long after somebody is intoxicated. So you could have used cannabis on a Friday night and then nothing else, and then get pulled over on a Sunday morning and have them do a blood test or a urine test and come up positive for THC, even though you haven't been intoxicated on THC for over 48 hours. So unlike alcohol, which stays in the system just really as long as you are feeling the effects, cannabis isn't like that. And again, we go back to those regular consumers, people that are consuming multiple times a day, every day. They are always going to have a level of THC in their system, even if they are not intoxicated. Now, this science has not stopped states like Colorado and Washington from setting a THC limit that is indicative of intoxication. So they have set 4 nanograms of THC in the blood in order to detect intoxication. But research that looks at the blood and urine of regular medical cannabis patients find that they always have more than that in their system. So they could basically be pulled over at any time, regardless if they've used cannabis recently, and still show up as being intoxicated. Other states like California, recognizing the limitations of this, have not instituted a nanogram limit and instead use field sobriety tests, which we have found to be much more indicative of whether somebody's intoxicated. So regardless of whether they have THC in their blood or their urine, if you ask someone to walk a straight line, if you ask them to do the little things, if you ask them to say the alphabet and they're not able to do those things, they probably should not be driving a car. So I think field sobriety tests are still really the best defense we have to identify whether or not somebody's too intoxicated to drive, whether that's from cannabis, lack of sleep, or alcohol.
I was just imagining a police officer with like a flashlight checking eyes to see if they're bloodshot. Like that's,
Yeah, well, and they do that. They do that, but
Yep.
again, that's also not indicative, right? Somebody could use Visine. Certain people get bloodshot eyes more than others. I wear contacts. My eyes can be bloodshot for reasons completely unrelated to cannabis, like allergies.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I don't agree with the testing, but
yeah, it's really just, is this person in their right mind to drive right now? Do they have the coordination? Do they have the reaction time that they need in order to make quick decisions on the road?
yeah, and I want to be clear, we are not condoning driving while intoxicated under any substance. So we're just giving you the facts. With that being said, how can people stay safe?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because yes, our advice is when in doubt, call a lift. It is not worth it. It's not worth it from a legal perspective. It's not worth it from a public health and safety perspective. So if you've been out at a consumption lounge or a party and you've been consuming cannabis, if that question comes in your head, am I okay to drive? The answer is probably no. So, take a ride, have a sober driver. I mean, these are all things we're taught as teenagers, and they absolutely hold true here, especially if you've been consuming cannabis and alcohol. So cannabis and alcohol have a 1 + 1 = 4 relationship. So the two of them together can be way more intoxicating than either of them alone. So if you've been using cannabis, and especially if you've been using cannabis and alcohol, just don't do it. Don't make plans ahead of time. Just don't drive. Again, it's not worth the risk. You may be more intoxicated than you think. And then if you're eating edibles, remember that it can take an hour or more, depending on the edible, to kick in. So if you decide, oh, I'm going to eat this edible, and then 15, 20 minutes later, you're like, I feel fine. I'm going to go drive this 45 minutes to my friend's house. That may kick in halfway there, and then you're not able to drive anymore. So really think about that onset with edibles and make sure you're timing it appropriately. If you want to use an edible at your friend's house and you don't want to wait an hour once you get there, make sure you're timing it so you're eating your edible and able to get to your friend's house before the effect kicks in.
I'm so glad you brought up edibles, because this whole time I was thinking about smoking, and a lot of people don't think that about the onset time for edibles and the dosing for that. So we do have another episode if you're interested in dosing and edibles. But as we put the brakes on today's plant-powered road trip, don't forget you can detour through our flourishing YouTube garden. There's tons of information there. It's like an ever-growing oasis of herbal wisdom. It's tended to by the none other than you, our incredible viewers, the roots that nourish our collective plant wisdom. So thank you so much. If you find questions sprouting up like roadside wildflowers or cannabis, simply want to cruise through a green conversation, don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mypersonalplants.com. We're always revved up and ready to chat about all things green and enlightening. And until our paths intersect again, stay curious as a cat on a car ride, stay as green as the envy of those well-maintained lawns, and keep those questions cruising like a well-oiled engine on a botanical highway. We'll see you next time.